Iona Italia.
Iona Italia. This
Yes.
is Iona Italia, and she is a co-editor of the crypto-centrist Aero magazine, or Aero magazine.
So I'm actually the sub-editor.
Sub-editor.
Helen Pluckrose is the editor-in-chief and my boss. And the magazine is called Areo. It's short for Areopagitica, which is from a work by Milton. So it's about free speech.
Oh, okay.
So it's called Areo.
And when was that founded?
I don't know. I think it probably hasn't been around for much more than 2 years.
Yeah.
I think at most, I only became aware of it when I started writing for it, which was probably about 2 years ago, but I think it was fairly new at that time.
Yeah. What prompted you to submit writing to it? Was it an issue about free speech that you had?
No, actually, what initially happened was that Malhar followed me on Facebook, and I wrote and I still write a lot of ranty threads on on Twitter. God, I'm a terrible interviewer.
No, you're totally fine. Well, you're an author primarily, so we'll get into the good stuff.
That will be my excuse. So I write a lot of ranty threads on Twitter, and Malhar liked one of my ranty threads, and he asked me if I would review the film The Red Pill. I don't know if you remember that film. So it's nothing to do with the alt-right and being red-pilled or any of those things. It's about the men's rights activism. Mm-hmm. And so I watched the film and I wrote a review for him. And after that, I basically, when I write political op-eds, I don't spend a lot of time on them. It's just when I feel as though I have a rant that I want to get off my chest, then I just kind of vomit it out onto my computer screen and send it off. So I think I've written probably 20 pieces for Areo mostly, and a few for Kanatas News.
So the political writing is not your main writing. That's just a prompted reaction to something that's going on in the environment or in time, history.
Yes, that's just because I'm an opinionated old fart. That's why I write political things. No, that's not. So my main writing, I guess, I wrote an academic book a few years ago. It's about 18th century essayists.
In what country, or just?
In London.
Okay.
It's called Anxious Employment, a title that's become rather more autobiographical than is comfortable for me. And I've also written a 2-volume, probably it's a 3rd volume will also come out, book on Tango, which is on Argentine Tango, which is coming out. The 1st volume is coming out in September, and the 2nd volume at Christmas. It's called Our Tango World.
And it's a mixture of different types of writing.
Yes, it's mostly discursive writing and some navel gazing. It's not a book about how to dance. It's a book about tango culture and people. And it's a kind of miscellaneous series of pieces about that. So the 1st volume is called Learning, Teaching and Dancing, and the 2nd volume is called Identity and Community.
And this isn't an academic book. This is a...
It's not academic, no. I would say it's creative nonfiction.
Okay.
So I have a rather poetic, heavily metaphorical, flowery prose style. Obviously not when I'm writing for Areo, but in general. That's my usual way of writing.
Yeah. Do you think that there's a connection between your interest in dance and your interest in metaphor in literature?
Well, I was an academic until 2006, and I had always believed that I had no creative streak to me at all, that I was a completely left-brained. I don't actually believe in this difference between left and right brain, but in the colloquial sense, I was a completely left-brained, cerebral, analytical, dry, unimaginative person. And I think the fact that I studied English literature didn't help, because I was completely daunted by the writers who I read and studied. And also I studied a lot of kind of very witty essayists and satirists, and I think being witty is the hardest thing of all. And I definitely can't do that. I'm not witty. And so I feel I was rather self-stymied in that regard. And then I moved to Argentina in 2006, and I left my academic job, and eventually I started working freelance. And when I started dedicating so much time to tango, to training as a dancer, I switched, and I suddenly realized there was no reason why I shouldn't write more creatively. Okay. And I started keeping a diary. And for 1 year, I also wrote a sonnet a week. Every week, I wrote a Shakespearean sonnet, all of which except 3 I discarded later.
Oh, okay.
Only 3 sonnets I kept. But
what was it about those 3?
Well, one I particularly liked because it had a very consistent metaphor running through it. It's called the Fresnel Effect, and it's about how we seek out, when we fall in love, we often seek out people who are very like us and who have exactly our faults. But we see the faults very differently in them than in ourselves. And it had this metaphor of reflections running through, which I liked. And the other 2 I kept. One was about lying. Actually about embroidering stories. And I wrote it for a friend of mine who likes to embroider stories, as we all do. And he actually got really nervous when his then boyfriend, now husband, was going home to meet his parents for the first time, my friend's parents, not because his parents might not accept him, even though his father was a gun-toting Republican type and was not too happy about the relationship. But what worried my friend was that his boyfriend would discover how exaggerated all the stories of his family life had been. How much embroidery had been added to the basic pattern. So I thought that was a very funny and a human and kind of understandable fear that he had. And so I wrote a sonnet for him. And the third one was about, the third sonnet I wrote was in response to the book A Universe from Nothing, that Lawrence Krauss, the recently kind of disgraced Lawrence Krauss, wrote. I loved that book. And it's about, at the end of that book, he's talking about the expansion of the universe, and he says, at some future time, the universe will have expanded so much there may still be life forms, but we will be so far apart from each other that we won't even be able to see stars in the sky. And whoever lives in that universe by then, the background micro radiation will have cooled. And there'll be various other problems with their sensors, which I won't go into detail with here, but they will think they are living alone in a steady state universe. So I wrote a sonnet about that called Dark Future. So it's about dark energy.
What was your
the energy?
When you were an academic, what were you doing primarily? Were you researching? Were you teaching?
I was primarily teaching.
Teaching what?
I taught 18th century mostly, so I taught the long 18th century from, as we call it, from 1660 up to 1820. And the period that I really loved was the sort of center point of that period. So my favorite writers were Samuel Johnson, Henry Fielding, Jonathan Swift. Yeah, I wrote about that central period, which is when the novel was beginning.
Yeah.
And I taught also the rise of the novel. No one has been interested in this for a long time. No one has ever asked me this for years.
That's what I studied when I was at my college.
Oh, okay. Where were you at? And you studied English literature as well? Oh, you were at Evergreen.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. How fascinating.
Yeah, you might have heard of it.
Yes, I have. Brett and Heather have become, well, I haven't met them in real life, but I have chatted to them, especially to her, quite a few times in sort of private messages, and I feel like they've become friends now.
Yeah, they're wonderful people.
And I was really shocked by the Evergreen events, and I wrote a piece about that actually for Ario. Yes, so I taught Rise of the Novel and, a number of other classes. I always taught a class on India and Pakistan in literature, usually centering around partition. So representing India from the kind of late 19th into the mid 20th century.
Is that because you had family from there, or your family there, or just an interest of yours?
Oh, okay. This is, I'll try to keep this not too complicated, but my parents died when I was quite young, and I grew up initially in Pakistan, in Karachi, and then I moved to the UK in 1978.
Okay.
And I grew up in the UK in kind of unofficial foster care, so with kind of mostly with family members. And I had no connection. My father was Indian, Parsi, and I don't know if you can see this. It's my Faroha necklace, because I'm a Zoroastrian.
Okay.
Because my father was a Parsi, it's patrilineal. And but I grew up with no connection with Indian family at all. And but yeah, that's where the interest came from. Mm-hmm. And I also taught a course on Scotland in literature, which was really fun. And I always taught also feminist thought, from Mary Astell to Germaine Greer. So I didn't I'm not so generally so interested in contemporary writers.
Okay, yeah.
So I stopped with A Female Eunuch was the latest text we dealt with in the class.
What year is that from? The Female Eunuch?
I think it's 1970 something. And then I also always did a course which was on representing homosexuality in literature, which was also really, really fun to teach. So I looked at some actual early literary depictions like Morris and The Well of Loneliness, and also a lot of early psychiatry. Yeah. And then some fun kind of ranty homophobic stuff from earlier in the period, which was, all demons and going to hell and things. That was also kind of fun. So yeah, those were my, I think those were my main interests when I was teaching.
I want to talk about feminist thought, but I have a geeky question for you.
Yes,
about
go ahead.
Literature. How do you think that the novel has developed much, or if it's kind of it hit a stable state and it's kind of stayed there?
So I feel that has it developed much? I think that the novel, the social realist novel, i.e. not these kinds of very experimental novels with open-ended plots or with alternative chapters. I feel that as a formula is such a good formula, and of course it's something we take for granted now, but at the time it was revolutionary. Whoops. Hold still.
Revolutionary.
Yeah, it was so revolutionary that
just like the French.
Microphones fell over. Not in that sense, revolutionary. That I feel it hasn't changed much. It hasn't needed to change. It's such a strong. It's such a strong and pleasurable form of writing.
You said it was. I'm going to paraphrase. You said it was useful. What is it useful for? The social realist novel. What does it transmit or create in the mind of the audience?
Oh, well, in that sense, I'm not sure if it's useful at all, and I'm not sure that we can really generalize so much about what it transmits. I think the main difference between the novel and one of the main differences between the novel and other forms is that it allows for much greater empathy. That you had, for the first time in the novel, you had the very flawed protagonists and protagonists from ordinary life. As you know, one of the first very popular novels was written in the first person as a 15-year-old serving girl.
Is this Fielding's?
This is Richardson's novel, Pamela,
okay.
It's called.
Yeah, okay.
Richardson, of course, wrote it when he was 55 when he wrote Pamela, and he had never written he'd never done any creative writing before, and he chose to write as a 15-year-old serving girl in the first person. In this
I don't think
long novel.
the sensitivity censors wouldn't let that book through the machine now.
No, I think none of my favorite writing would survive the censoriousness, people's censoriousness. But luckily, I think people want to publish and sell books that people will read, and they will read them if they're enjoyable. So I think most people don't really care what the kind of outrage machine might say about them.
Yeah.
That's my feeling.
Do you have a feeling that there is a real censoriousness working in the established purveyors of especially literature right now?
To be honest, I don't have much contact with the established purveyors of literature, so I'm not.
You're not worried.
I'm not too aware. Well, with all these phenomena. Especially, I think, phenomena that to do with regressive left. I'm still using that term that Majid Nawaz coined.
Okay.
Or the ultra woke, I like to call them on Twitter because it has fewer characters. I think that a lot of the arguments we have about these things are about how big a threat they are, how important they are, and
how important are they?
Yeah, to know that you need to really have a way of predicting how things are going to unravel. And I'm try to resist predictions.
Okay.
So I don't know. I think that it's a tendency that I kind of deplore, but I don't know, whether this is a major tendency that is going to really affect literature or whether it isn't. So I recently listened to Lionel Shriver talking about this, and I read a couple of her articles. I loved several of Lionel Shriver's books. We Need to Talk About Kevin is a fantastic book and very timely. It's about school shooting. School shooting. It's not actually shooting, but I won't say more than that because I don't want to give away the plot, but it's a superb novel, and I also loved The Post-Birthday World and Goodbye to All That. were all fantastic novels. So I'm very fond of Shriver. I haven't read her recent novel, but her recent novel got absolutely carpeted in certain circles because the main protagonists were an African American. Were they African American or were they British black? I don't know, but were a black family, and people felt that she portrayed them in a cliched manner. That was the more reasonable criticism, was that she portrayed them in a cliched manner, and then the more insane criticism was that being white, she shouldn't have any black characters in her novel to begin with. Or she should only have black characters who'd been through the kind of sieve of a sensitivity reading.
Yeah.
And which sounds absolutely appalling to me. But I don't know whether that actually affected Shriver's sales or popularity at all in the wider world. That I haven't looked into. It would be interesting to know. Dog piles, I think they're called, on authors, where people on Twitter have just gone berserk.
En masse, yeah.
En masse at writers for the way that they have portrayed particular characters, and I think that's extremely silly. Either you enjoy the book and the character speaks to you, or they don't.
It's I don't know if it's I guess the people call it a moral panic, but there's something reflexive about getting your outrage on with a bunch of friends. And I don't know, again, to go back to what you're saying, like, I don't know how urgent we need to be about that. I mean, it can, I think Helen was just tweeting about this yesterday, or maybe the day before, about somebody, some guy said that I don't even know what. It was something about menstruation.
Oh,
this
yes.
guy didn't want, like, menstruation to be a public thing. I don't know, but...
Yes, he was an OAP, and he said, he made some comment, it was an MP, a British MP, I think this is where it began, who came into Parliament, and she was late for the debate. And she said, I'm really sorry I'm late, but the reason is that it's because I'm on my period. And she said, she claimed that she had spent £25, which is probably about $30-something, American folks out there, on her period that month, on kind of, I don't know, tampons and
did she hire somebody to insert them for her? Are they really that expensive?
Well, I think £25 seems like a lot. I think that if you, I think £25 seems really excessive. I guess you might use tampons and then also little pad things in case of leaks, and then you might also have painkillers. And although usually that's ibuprofen, and generic ibuprofen is very inexpensive. It's about, I think I got a pack which was 82 cents the other day. And maybe wipes are nice in summer. I don't know. So I still don't see how it could add up to £25. But I think she was making a point about what people are calling period poverty. And it's a reasonable point, which is that sanitary products are you're charged VAT on sanitary products. So she is arguing against this and maybe being slightly hyperbolic about the pricing.
Yeah.
So he said he felt periods should be a personal thing. And this was an OAP who said this. So, he's a grumpy old man.
What's OAP?
Sorry, old age pensioner.
Oh, okay.
So he's somebody receiving, his pension.
Yeah.
So, he was a little bit kind of disgusted of Tunbridge Wells about it, which doesn't seem very extreme to me. But people's responses were so extreme. They were writing him descriptions, and they were taking photographs of bloodstained menstrual pads and things and sending them to him. And then Helen told them to leave him alone, and then they started sending her photos and memes of feces. So and some of them, because they thought that they misread her tweet, and they thought that she was defending him, and they went straight to outrage.
Okay.
I think most people misread her tweet, which was really pretty clear if you were paying any attention. But the fact that they went straight to outrage when they misunderstood this was just kind of insane. I have no idea how many those people are. I just don't know. I did get dogpiled a couple of times myself, and twice I privated the account. And always my problems have been with Indian ethno-nationalists. So it's Hindu extremist types.
Really?
Yeah, because when I was living in India last year, I was tweeting a lot of stuff about Indian politics, and Hindu extremists are actually, I think they really should be some kind of prize, because they really are the most illiterate. When they troll you, it's almost incomprehensible. You're actually thinking, what do they even mean to say here? The most illiterate and the most hostile and the nastiest and the most persistent trolls. And it's said that Prime Minister Modi has a kind of paid troll army. Books have been written about this. I'm going to read that and see what I think about that. But certainly some of the worst ones, Modi follows them on Twitter. And generally I don't judge people by their follows, but he does follow a hell of a lot of really nasty people who spend all day sending rape threats and stuff.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, because they're I mean, I guess he doesn't pay attention to that, and he's not himself a troll, but they're all kind of really, really bad pro-Modi supporters. They're almost as bad as Jordan Peterson fans. That's a joke. They're worse. No, I mean, Jordan Peterson fans I find very annoying, but no one has ever sent me rape threats because I'm not a Peterson devotee.
Yeah. So would you consider yourself a critic of Jordan Peterson then?
I think that to be a critic, I would have to follow him more closely, and I really don't have the patience. I feel that he is, I find him a very frustrating figure, because sometimes he's very incisive and articulate, and I agree with most of his criticisms of the ultra woke. I wish you wouldn't use the term cultural Marxism. I think that's misleading and creates a kind of stalking horse for people. But I find his critiques of the left mostly sensible, and he does say some quite sensible and articulate things when he wants to. He can be very clear. And then a lot of his other stuff I find is just the most extraordinary gobbledygook. They call it Pomo-adjacent Petersonian gobbledygook. And he's always redefining words, and he does this extremely annoying thing whereby he first redefines the word to mean something nobody else would mean by it. So, for example, what is truth? Well, a fact is true if it is useful to our survival as a species, or to reproductive success as a species or something. And he even calls this a Darwinian concept of truth, which really annoys me, because Darwin is one of my favorite people. Really? And I do not think Darwin would have agreed that with this definition, with this loony epistemology of Peterson's. So he will start by defining a fact in that way, and then he will slip around, and he will end up kind of saying that something is a fact, but he means it as an actual fact, not as in his own definition. So he does this Mott and Bailey thing, where he says, well, actually I'm talking about religion as in anything you believe is important. And then, 2 paragraphs later, or 2 kind of 10 minutes later, he's saying, well, actually, if you really have an inbuilt morality. That morality is based on Christian theology. So, he's gone from religion is whatever you want it to be.
Yeah.
So broadly defined, completely meaningless, to it's actually, Christianity and the Christian kind of mythos. I find him exceptionally annoying, and I can't stand. I mean, what really bugs me about him is his use of language.
Okay.
So I much prefer, for example, Ben Shapiro, with whom I disagree on absolutely everything, except for when Ben Shapiro is talking about free speech and criticizing the ultra woke. I agree with him on that, but I disagree with him on absolutely everything. There we are.
So you were saying
it didn't like Ben Shapiro.
It got really upset about Ben Shapiro, but your point was that you appreciate Ben Shapiro's rhetorical style, or it's probably more than just a style, but I
like the fact that I can understand what the man is saying, whereas Peterson, I feel, is so obscure, and I would accuse him of being obscurantist, i.e. he's being obscure on purpose. Mm-hmm. I can't prove that. Maybe maybe he can't help it. But he lapses between this comprehensible and this needlessly incomprehensible way of expressing himself, and I think that annoys me more than anything. So I would prefer somebody whose views I find repugnant, but I actually understand what they're saying, than this morass.
You've mentioned that you have studied feminism. Would you say that you're a feminist? And do you think that feminism has morphed into this ultra wokeness, or has the ultra wokeness taken feminism and thrown it in a different direction?
Yes, well, I still use the term. And even though I get so much resistance every time, and I think that the label has become less important to me, because so many people have very different interpretations of what they mean by it. And some people mean by it something which I find somewhat loony. And other people just mean an advocacy of women's rights. And there is this continual kind of argument about terminology. Whenever you talk about feminism, you have some people who say, for example, to Helen, how can you not be a feminist? Because Helen Pluckrose does not describe herself as a feminist. That must mean you don't think there should be equal rights for women. But of course, Helen is not defining feminist in that way, as meaning you support equal rights. So she calls herself an egalitarian, a gender egalitarian. I like the idea of women's rights advocacy, and I might, in some point in the future, move over to that term if this term really becomes unusable. Yes, I would say my feminism is very heavily influenced by, in particular, by Mary Wollstonecraft. That, for me, is the beginning of feminist thought. What we have before Mary Wollstonecraft is mostly, I would say, celebrations of women, which is slightly different from feminism. So there are a lot of books. Especially in the 17th century, there are many books. For example, there's one called From Abbassiat to Zenobia, which are collections of mini biographies of famous women. Mm-hmm. And many statements about, I think there's one that is just called Women Superior to Men, which will give you an idea of the kinds of writings that are out there before Wollstonecraft. They're kind of competition between the War of the Sexes writings and people who are championing women's side in that, or drawing attention to neglected female figures from history. Yeah. I think there's that, and there's kind of people advocating also for education. Sorry.
When was Wollstonecraft writing?
1788 was the Vindication of the Rights of Woman, it's called. And I think she is the first person who puts it in terms of equal rights, equal treatment, etc., who's not playing a kind of war of the sexes game with it. And I was also very influenced by Virginia Woolf and Simone de Beauvoir. So I think, and I feel that it's still, I still feel that women are disadvantaged both globally and much less so in the West. But even in the West, for a couple of reasons. Globally, I think it's obvious, it's clear. If you look at the treatment of women in India, for example, that is just, it's appalling. But I feel that in the West, there's a kind of two-pronged sort of attack, which is, on the one hand, there's been a resurgence in Islamic piety. And there's also, on the left, there are a lot of people who are apologists for Islamic piety because they are cultural or moral relativists, well, basically they're cultural moral relativists. They feel it's not our place to critique their culture. And that culture is highly misogynistic. So I find that worrying. I also I feel that intersectional theory has not been good for women, that people have become very, very obsessed with race as the main marker of discrimination. And that has kind of crowded out ideas about women's issues and has divided people.
Well, it's leaking into LGBT rights also.
Yes. So now they want to put a brown and black stripes in the rainbow flag, whatever. They can knock themselves out and put any stripes that they like and have the entire alphabet. It's already, winning move in Scrabble. The whole LGBT, etc. I just put 3 dots after that. This kind of idea that you must be always, if you're not actively and almost primarily concerned with race, then you are contributing to racism. That I think is a very unfortunate development. And then there's also the trans issue, which is really complicated, and I just do not know what to think about it.
Have you written a tirade on it?
I haven't written a tirade on it yet. Maybe I will, but I'm a little afraid because I think I think trans activists, and I should be clear, I'm not talking about trans people, only activists. Activists tend in general to be extremists. And part of that is because it's more effective. They push the envelope. They're like somebody kind of bargaining up a price. So they first offer you something that they think you're not going to pay, and then they will bargain it down. I think that's how a lot of activists work. And they want to change your view of things, and to do that, they have to really turn things on their heads. So it's not just trans activists who can be very extreme, but I find them particularly extreme at the moment among activist groups. So I think that the whole trans thing at least raises issues for feminists. That I think, I think that's it. I think those are my reasons.
In championing women's rights, how would you recommend people steer away from extremist activism in just within feminism or within just advocating? What's the difference between keeping yourself an advocate and not an activist? Is there...
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I don't mean to imply that activism is necessarily a bad thing. I'm never going to be an activist. I don't have that personality. And I get too emotional in fights and arguments, so I would not be able to kind of take the heat. But I don't think activism is necessarily a bad thing. For example, Sarah Haider, the head of the U.S. Organization of Ex-Muslims, and one of the people I most admire, one of the public figures I most admire, she is definitely an activist. She is raising awareness of an issue, of basically a single issue, but a very important single issue, and she is also, I think, practically helping to lift people.
Lift up people?
Rescue people, from Muslim majority countries, people who are endangered.
Yeah.
And providing also a self-help group for ex-Muslims. Safe space, and I still use that term in a very non-derogatory way, actually. I think safe spaces are important. I just don't think a whole university should be a safe space. But I'm fine with the idea that people have a space where they feel that they can talk freely about their specific issue.
Yeah.
And for ex-Muslims, it's a literal safe space because they are actually physically endangered often and threatened. So activism is great. I think that it's key. What's key is that not to lose the desire to persuade. That what you want to try to do is convince people of your views, not alienate them. And we all, and I'm guilty of this a lot myself because I get too emotional, but we're all guilty of flipping over from persuasion to kind of abusing the other person for their views, or just attempts at coercion, which generally don't work, or shaming, or also just kind of fuck you kind of thing. Jesse Singal, one of his articles recently, the first comment on it just said, "Hi, fuck you." That's not very effective activism. But we've all felt that way.
Yeah. I've been spending a lot of time this year. I started doing this YouTube thing after my college, Evergreen State College, blew up.
Yes.
And I started reporting on it.
Please tell me about the Evergreen. Well, sorry, this is supposed to be my interview, so maybe I shouldn't ask you, but...
No, I just wanted to point out that watching the Evergreen situation and then going back through the documents and the videos and the orientations and the lectures and just pulling up a lot of stuff about this college that I went to and that I experienced firsthand has led me down this path of looking at activism and looking at the regressive left or the ultra woke and kind of just really considering the methods that it uses and the ends that it really wants and the means of getting there. And so I think that what it's doing, and I've seen this happen with trans rights, activism, and I've said this too. I'm like, when I'm criticizing trans rights activism, I'm not criticizing the trans people themselves. It's the activists that I have a problem with because the way that they're behaving, and I worry about the urgency that people are feeling right now about the state of the world. And I think that urgency to fix the world is somehow blinding people to the fact that they're actually making it worse by not acting in a less urgent manner. And maybe the sky really is falling. Maybe Trump really is like the nuclear bomb of all political,
Yeah, maybe.
states.
I find it really hard to know. I'm very concerned about the things that Trump is doing. Less about him, but I'm concerned about kind of dismantling of certain structures in American society. And I'm also concerned about the left dismantling certain structures. So I was very disheartened by the ACLU's announcement that they're no longer going to be indiscriminately defending free speech.
Was that recent, or that was
that was pretty recent? Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I think I think they said that it was no longer going to be a priority because they have other things to fight. So I think they put it in such a way as to leave it open to return to that. But I think they're really the main people fighting free speech. There is another organization, The Fire, who are claiming they will do free speech cases, but they seem to be really strongly affiliated with the right and with Turning Point USA and things. So I don't trust them to be a neutral voice on this. Whereas I do trust the ACLU, or I think I still trust the ACLU. And also what happened with Southern Poverty Law Center. I'm concerned about dismantling from the government and also reactions from the left. And I guess that one of the main reasons I don't critique Trump and the Trump administration more is that I stopped, I was following NPR politics and I was listening for at least half an hour every day, all the way up to the election. And when Trump was elected, I stopped following the kind of Washington politics, and I never went back to that.
Why?
I find it so, I feel depressed and bored. That Trump is, it's very dispiriting what Trump is doing, and he's also the most boring person. There's not even a kind of wickedness there. I feel there's nothing there. He opens his mouth and just whatever random words come out, a bit like this interview, but whatever random words will create noise and fill the time for 10 minutes or whatever time he has. That's what comes out.
Yeah.
It could be kind of anything. And he's obviously not a very nice person, so what comes out is not very nice. But it's not even, there's not even a plan or a strategy that I see. And I just, it's just populism in its kind of purest form, whatever is going to please his base.
Okay.
I don't know if you've seen Randy Rainbow, who is a really wonderful satirical singer.
I don't think so.
He does these musical parodies of the Trump administration, and you should listen to the one which is called It's All About His Base. The song It's All About that Base. He does one, It's All About His Base, which I think hits the mark completely. So I feel as though in order to do more thoroughgoing critique, I would need to follow the administration. So I did rant quite a lot about the situation with ICE or ICE recently, because that caught my attention and I started following it. But in general, I have not been following Trump very closely.
Yeah, you've been following the woke, the ultra woke.
I've been following the ultra woke because I find them completely fascinating. Also, it's much more interesting to me because rather than just I completely disagree with methods, aims, and kind of rhetoric on the right, or on most of the right, certainly on the American right, and on the Indian right, most definitely. The Indian right is an interesting contrasting case, which maybe we can get onto, but with the excesses on the left, they usually start at least from a place where I agree with them, and then they go off on some, I'm walking along with them at the very beginning of the track, and then they go right off a precipice suddenly. I think I find it's more, I feel as though they are engaging with more interesting ideas. So intersectionality, at least, is, I disagree with it, but it's a kind of intellectual idea, philosophy. Okay. It's come from. There's an academic approach to it. It's much more coherent as a way of thinking, I would say. Not convincing, but I think it's more coherent. What's more coherent than Trumpism, which is not saying that much.
Okay.
Let's say. There is a kind of there is an intellectual sort of background to it. So I find the left just, I find the excessive left just very entertaining and fun. So I'm afraid that my tendency to punch left, as it were, to focus on the left, is not because I think that they are a greater danger. I just really don't know what the greatest danger is. I think the thing that most scares me is Islamic extremism, but I don't even know if that is the greatest danger. It's the thing that most kind of chills me and frightens me.
How do you speak about that without getting in trouble yourself?
Oh yeah, so I have kind of I have been talking about it much less since I was living in India, for reasons I'll get to in a moment. But I'm a fully paid up member of the Quilliam Circle. So my approach to that is that we should signal boost liberal, genuinely liberal voices from the Muslim world, reformers, ex-Muslims, also people doing interfaith work. We should throw our full support behind those people. And that, I feel, is the best approach to countering this kind of wave of piety, which I think has nothing, I really think it has nothing to do with race at all. It operates the way that all religions operate. These are, or all religions operate in when they're operating badly, which is these are good people who are holding horrible opinions and doing bad things because they believe their God wants them to do that. So I don't feel like it's helpful to blame and demonize Muslims at all. I think it's helpful to keep countering the ideas, and I think it's really not helpful to be an apologist to say, oh, Islam is a religion of peace, there's actually no problem here, move along folks, nothing to see.
Okay.
That is very, I find quite infuriating. But my approaches to Quilliam is one of only two things that I give any regular money to because I'm extremely poor.
What is Quilliam?
Quilliam is a Muslim reform organization in the UK, founded by Majid Nawaz. So they are really doing a lot of activism, and it's absolutely trying to create a more humane vision of Islam. I'm also a big fan of Zuhdi Jasser, although he's a Republican, so I disagree with all of his kind of partisan politics. But I was very influenced by his book, which was called A Battle for the Soul of Islam.
Okay.
And would to promote a more humane vision of Islam. So I feel that's the way to go, and I don't think it's important to choose whether reform is going to work or whether apostasy is more effective. We should support ex-Muslims, we should support outspoken atheists, and we should support reformers.
Yeah, basically the liberal idea of supporting a commons where everybody's safe to learn and live in their own way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The draining of the oppression.
I mean, I stopped. I haven't changed my views on this at all, and I really, really dislike Islam as a religion. Also, and I feel that part of the problem is in the kind of design of Islam. It makes it not very easy to have a liberal and a kinder interpretation. People do, nevertheless, you can. But it's if some alien came down from space and you gave him the Quran and the Hadiths, and then you said, okay, look, this is ISIS interpretation, and here is Majid Nawaz's interpretation. The alien would definitely think ISIS interpretation made a lot more sense. So ISIS's interpretation is not the only possible one. Every interpretation is possible when it comes to religion. You can make it mean anything.
But the way that it's designed.
Yeah, it pushes you towards a more illiberal, not necessarily even violent, but a more illiberal interpretation of life. So I'm very anti that, but I stopped commenting on it so much because for the past year I've been living in India, and my plan now for the future is to spend a couple of months each year in India. In India, there's a huge problem with anti-Muslim bigotry and with Hindu extremism and Hindu ethno-nationalism. So it's kind of become more of a priority to me to defend Muslims as fellow, I'm not an Indian citizen, but as citizens, as fellow citizens, and as people who need to be approached on a case-by-case basis and not stereotyped, judged as a group. That side of things has become more important to me than the critique of kind of Islamic excesses because of the experience in India. But I haven't changed my views. I've just kind of changed my changed the emphasis a bit.
As you're the first Zoroastrian I've spoken to.
So
that's a very old religion.
Yes, I don't want to get into questions of belief and non-belief here, but I don't consider myself an atheist because I do use the religion, I guess I would say.
Okay.
And I feel I don't have any rational justifications for this at all. And I have a lot of, I actually really admire and like many very outspoken atheists. You know, Christopher Hitchens is a hero of mine. I also love Richard Dawkins. Part of this is that I feel, when I arrived in India, I felt so at home, which is bizarre because I grew up completely outside India. I had no contact with Indian relatives. I forgot how to speak Gujarati, which I used to speak as a child. And I don't look that Indian, but I felt just very deeply connected. And even though I didn't like India in many ways, but I just felt like, nevertheless, I felt like this is really a very deeply part of me. And I feel that about the religion as well. I'll just leave it at that, I think.
I was just wondering.
It is a very weird old religion. Somebody called it a vintage hipster religion recently.
Oh, really? I don't know anything about it, and I wanted to know, because you spoke about Islam as being difficult to read in a liberal manner that would provide the basis for a liberal society. Yeah. Do you think that that's true or not true about Zoroastrianism? Are the principles of it syncretic?
Largely, I would say that the main kind of religious texts are much easier to are much less problematic. The really problematic, or there's very little problematic stuff in there. There's a lot of stuff that is irrelevant to our life today. So there are many instructions about farming and how to treat animals and stuff. There's a Zoroastrian version of halal, which I've forgotten what it's called. I'm not really an expert on this religion, I should also tell you, but it's much more humane. It involves you stun the animal with a big stone and then you chop their head off immediately. That's the kind of Zoroastrian prescribed slaughter method. And there's lots of stuff about how to look after your goats, and which you may or may not need. And also there is there are a lot of ritual things, and then a lot of the kind of usual stuff that every religion has about basic ethics, basic intuitive ethics. Treat people well, be a good person, don't lie, etc. And there are very few separate instructions for men and women. So it's always Zoroastrians should do this, followers of Ahura Mazda should do this. It's not women need to do this, men need to do that. Okay. There's very little advice that is gender specific. So all of that I like. The religion is really problematic in a couple of ways. One is that there is an absolute obsession with hygiene in Zoroastrianism. Luckily, we don't have circumcision. There's no body mutilations in the religion. But there are menstrual taboos, which I think some of the more orthodox people follow. The orthodox are probably ultra-Orthodox Zoroastrians are a minority within Zoroastrians, and we are very few to begin with. So these are like the 12 people who follow this. Not quite, I exaggerate slightly, but there are some ultra-pious people who follow a lot of menstrual taboos. And then there's also taboos to do with our disposal of the dead. So the area, the Dungar Wadi as it's called, which is the grounds where the funerals are carried out and where we have the Towers of Silence, are sort of ritually unclean. Even though the Dungar Wadi in Bombay is probably one of the cleaner parts of Bombay, right? It's not. It's a very incredibly beautiful place. Only Parsis can enter, so you're supposed to, shower completely, change your clothes and everything else after you've been to the Dungar Wadi. And the priests who work at the Dungar Wadi, they're not untouchable. You can touch them and you can drink tea there and all of that stuff. But they're supposed to live at the Dungar Wadi as a separate caste and intermarry only among themselves.
Yeah. Where's the concentration of Zoroastrians in the world? Is it mainly in India?
It's in India. So the other thing about it, the other problematic thing is that we don't accept converts. So you can only be Zoroastrian if your father was Zoroastrian. And for most people, it's no exceptions. I mean, no exceptions. So if you had an adopted child, they would not be Zoroastrian. Your spouse cannot convert. And if your mother was Zoroastrian but the father wasn't, you are not. So that is really problematic, I think, and it leads to all kinds of inhumane situations.
Oh, really? Okay.
So those are the two big problems in the religion, I would say, or in the current interpretation. Yeah. This embargo on conversion stems from when the Zoroastrians came from Persia in around the 8th century and settled in India.
Oh, and they did that en masse?
Yeah, in theory. There's a lot of legends around this.
Okay, yeah.
The archaeological evidence suggests that maybe they came in a little more gradually, rather than dramatically all getting together in this boat sailing across, as of course the story goes. But when Iran Islamized, the Zoroastrians went to India, and then they became Parsis, is the name of the ethnic group. So the religion is Zoroastrianism. The ethnic group is the Parsis. Okay. And they settled originally in Gujarat and later went down to Bombay, which is in the next door state of Maharashtra. And now I would say probably half are in Bombay and half are in the diaspora. And there's little tiny communities in various places in Canada, in Singapore, and a couple of other places. And there was a tiny community in Karachi, which my father was part of. My father was Indian, but he moved probably before partition to Pakistan. So he was born in Bombay. That's probably more detail than you require. But
No, thank you. I've never, like I said, I've never met a Zoroastrian before. That's That's
I'm
fascinating.
honored.
The what's the name of the holy book then, or the scripture? Is there a
It's Vedas. It's
Vedas?
Vedas,
Okay.
which is just like holy book, with the same as in the Hindu religion. And the one that's most popular is very short, actually.
It's tablet size. You can just bring it with you wherever you go.
It's not quite that. Well, actually, probably yes. The one I have is like A4 sized paperback with parallel English texts.
Oh wow.
But
What's the language then? The primary language of it?
So the religious language is the religion is conducted in Avesta, which is a dead Persian language.
Oh wow.
And in fact, it's really much more like Catholicism than Protestantism in that the priests do everything in Avesta, and prayers are in Avesta, and I can only remember some of them by heart. You're supposed to remember a whole bunch of them by heart.
Yeah.
I don't understand Avesta at all. So.
Are you allowed to talk in general terms about the direction of Aereo magazine and where you guys are headed, where you're steering the ship?
I can tell you that we are going to have an accompanying podcast for Aereo. Helen
great.
and I are doing a podcast.
Excellent.
And we have recorded a first episode, and we're just waiting for it to be somebody is sound editing it for us. The first people I invited on are the two guys whose names I can never remember. One of them is called Jason and Bradley. I think their first names are, but I don't remember their surnames. But they wrote the book, The Rise of Victimhood Culture.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah.
they're
Okay.
first guests that we plan to have on. I also already Jessie Single agreed to come on.
Excellent.
I'm a big admirer of Jessie's. And I would really like to have Heather Hying come on and talk about biology things.
So are you guys going to
yes.
keep focusing on politics or branch out into other fields?
I think we may branch out a bit. Because as Helen put it, surprisingly, Helen is only interested in politics, but I have more wide-ranging interests. But yes, I think we will try to branch it out a bit. So we just published an article which is about the ecological implications of Mars colonization, called Life on Mars. So I think I personally would love to see us do more science and art things, but it's going to be up to Helen. Helen is in charge. And on the podcast, I'm kind of in charge.
Oh,
so
there you go.
The podcast may be more wide-ranging because I think that I'm not knowledgeable enough to really take on the kind of Trump administration side of things, and there is a limit to the number of things you can say about the ultra woke. Although they do continue to kind of give us new material all the time.
Yeah, they do. They are a basket of very fruitful. It's like a cornucopia.
Absolutely,
topics.
People keep. There's this kind of tendency to be very hostile towards or suspicious of people who are continually making fun of the left and very rarely say anything about the right, except to occasionally exclaim how bad Trump is. And that is definitely my own case as well. When I'm critiquing the right, it's almost always the Indian right. But I feel as though if you don't want us to critique the excesses of the left, they should be less entertaining.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I know it may not be that entertaining when you're at the receiving end, as Brett and Heather were, for example.
Well, yeah.
So I don't want to minimize that, but mostly it's very entertaining to bystanders. So.
Yeah, they make spectacular car crashes. Mm-hmm. Which
I can't look away.
Yeah, which might not be as troubling as some of the bigger problems of our society that are more very slow, pervasive.
Yeah.
I'm not saying anything about anything specifically, but there are bigger problems than, protesting students and censorious book publishers. Though those are the people that I'm going to keep on poking because they get in the way of.
Yeah, it's fun, and it's what I feel qualified to do. I don't feel qualified to be a kind of Washington commentator on events in Washington.
Yeah, yeah. And
I
so,
just don't.
You're on a writing retreat right now, and
Well, no, it's not. Well, kind of unofficially, I am house sitting, and I'm using it to do writing.
okay. You said something about cats. Can you show? Is there a cat to show everybody? I try to put a cat in every. No. If it's,
you
if
don't.
it's,
So let me see if I can find them. I'm going to just adjust this, and I have to lift the screen, so if anybody has seasickness, you might want to look away for a moment. Oh shit, but it might be very messy in here. This is Raven. I don't know, can you see?
just tilt the. Oh, there we go.
Hello, Raven. Can you see Raven? So she is quite old. Oops.
It's excellent. I think I'm going to end the interview there because that's how I usually end the interview for my shows.
How funny. Okay, great.